My name is Lindsay Graham, and I'm an attorney with the Nashville Public Defender's Office. If you've ever seen a crime TV show, then you've heard Miranda Warnings. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided to you before police questioning. And sometimes police will also tell you if you decide to answer police questions, you have the right to change your mind at any time and stop talking. So let's start with the first right. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Where does that right come from? That comes from the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution that says, anyone accused of a crime cannot be compelled to be a witness against themselves. What does that mean? It simply means you do not have to answer police questions, and in fact, you shouldn't. Some people think if they did nothing wrong, then they should just go ahead and answer police questions. No way. Why is that? Well, number one, police can legally lie to you. They can lie about the evidence that they have, and they can lie about what they're investigating. So it's important to recognize that you have the right to remain silent and that you should use it when you're subject to police question. However, one thing to keep in mind is that in most places, if police approach you, you are required to identify yourself and to provide any identifying documents. But you don't have to answer other police questions. Here's a fun fact. You don't even have to wait until the Miranda warnings have been given prior to deciding to invoke, which just means rely or use your right to remain silent. It's important to note that once you invoke, which just means tell police, I would like to remain silent, that you don't answer any additional questions. At that point, it's important to be silent. Why is that? Well, just like you have the right to answer some police questions and then change your mind, you also have the right to say, I'm invoking my right to remain silent, but then also change your mind later. So, if you invoke your right to remain silent, but later begin to answer police questions or voluntarily provide police with information, that will be used against you in a court of law. So remember, if you're subject to police questions, you should always clearly state, I'm invoking my right to remain silent. Bonus points if you also tell them, I'd like to exercise my right to an attorney prior to answering any police questions. The next section of Miranda warnings we'll cover is the portion that says you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you. Where does that right come from? That comes from the Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution. It guarantees individuals accused of a crime the right to the assistance of counsel. But what if I can't afford one? Great question. That's where my office comes in. Public defenders represent people every day all over the country at little to no cost to the individual. So don't worry if you can't afford a lawyer. So when does the right to an attorney come in? Again, you don't have to wait until police inform you of your right to an attorney. Anytime you have a police interaction, you are entitled to an attorney. So you can invoke your right to an attorney at any time you are subject to police questioning. So if police show up to your house, knock on your door, and say, hi, I'd like to talk to you about a recent car break-in in your neighborhood, you can tell them, I do not wish to answer police questions, and I would like to invoke my right to an attorney. If you're pulled over on the side of the road and police ask you, what's in that bag? You can tell them, I do not wish to answer police questions without consulting an attorney, and I would like to invoke my right to an attorney. It's important to note that courts have said when you are relying on, which just means utilizing or using your right to an attorney, that has to be very clear and unequivocal. What does unequivocal mean? It just means without question. So you can't be wishy-washy. You can't say, maybe I should get an attorney, and definitely don't ask police what they think. Police can lie, so it's important to remember you have the right to an attorney, so you can use it. So simply state, I would like to assert my right to an attorney prior to answering any police questions, and then remain silent. If you're later charged with a crime, you can still request an attorney. And don't worry if you can't afford one. You should always try to get a lawyer instead of representing yourself. So when are Miranda warnings actually required? If you've seen television shows, you typically see that anytime the handcuffs come on a subject, police will start to provide Miranda warnings. That's not actually what the law requires. The law requires that Miranda warnings be given when an individual is in custody and is subject to police questions that are designed to elicit an incriminating response. Let's break that down. So what does it mean to be in custody? That just means that your freedom of movement is restricted. A good way of knowing if you're in custody is if you've been formally arrested. But you are also considered to be arrested if you've been detained. How do you know if you've been detained? Well, in the state of Tennessee, during a traffic stop, if police use their blue lights, you are detained and you are not free to leave. Another way you can know is simply to ask, am I being detained or am I free to leave? If the answer is yes, that you are being detained, then you should remain silent. But remember, in most states, you are required to identify yourself. So be sure to provide your identifying documents to police and then notify them that you're exercising your right to remain silent and your right to an attorney. Just because you're being detained, that doesn't mean that you're required to be given your Miranda warnings. Miranda warnings are only required when police ask questions that can be used against you. That means police can ask you simple questions like, what's your name and where are you coming from tonight? You are not required to answer those questions, except remember that in most places you are required to identify yourself. If you want to know for sure if you're required to identify yourself, you should ask police, am I free to leave or am I being detained? If police tell you you are free to leave, you should leave. If police tell you that you are being detained, make sure that you comply with their request to identify yourself by providing identifying documents like your driver's license or ID and proof of insurance if it's a traffic stop. Often, police might show up at someone's house that they suspect of a crime. They might ask you to come on down to the police station with them. This often feels more like a demand rather than a request, but it's important for you to know that if you go to the police station, especially in your own car, then that's considered voluntary. And you are not considered to be in custody even if you're meeting with police at the police station. So, any answers or statements that you give to police during that meeting can be used against you. It's important to know that they're also not required to provide you with Miranda warnings in that situation. But we know we don't have to wait for police to tell us our right to remain silent and our right to an attorney before exercising those rights. So if police ask you to come down to the station with them, you can tell them, no, I do not wish to go to answer your questions. I am exercising my right to remain silent, and I do not wish to answer police questions without an attorney present. When you are being read your Miranda warnings, usually police will ask you to sign a document that says you have been read or you read them yourself and that you understand the Miranda warnings. If you don't understand the warnings, do not sign the document. You also shouldn't really ask police to explain your rights to you. Remember, police can lie. And also remember, you have the right to an attorney. Police aren't lawyers. Don't ask them to explain your rights when you have the right to ask an attorney to explain them to you instead. So, do not sign any paper that police give you unless you want to give up your rights and answer their questions. Instead, State clearly, I do not wish to answer your questions, and I do not wish to proceed without an attorney present. And then remember, be silent.